Hi, we're going to look at graphing exponential functions. I'm going to use mostly decimals with this, so no fractions. Exponential meaning we have exponent, that's a variable, we're going to fill that in. So normally we have a starting point with x. Here we don't, we're just going to put some random numbers in. And I'm going to use -3 to +3. So what happens is I have these x values, I get this big space in the middle because I'm using this to substitute my numbers in, then we'll come up with our y's. So let's start off at 0. What's happening is I have 2 to the 0 power plus 1. If we remember our rules of exponent, anything raised to the 0 power is going to be 1. So what's really happening is that, giving us 2. When we plug 1 in, we're saying 2 to the first power plus 1, which is 2. Add them up, we get that 3. 2 to the second power plus 1 gives us 4 and 1, which is 5. And then 2 to the third power plus 1 gives us 8 and 1, which is 9. Now, we could keep going and plug 4, 5, 6 in, but all of a sudden those y values are going to shoot off our chart. We're not going to have room to graph them. Who cares? They're way out there. We don't need them. Now, let's worry about the negatives. This is where things get a little weird. So clean this up a little bit. We're going to say 2 to the -1 power plus 1. Now, if you were to take this and plug that in your calculator, or even use our rules of exponents, this I can push to the bottom, and it gives us 1 over 2 to the first power. When you have a negative exponent, when you move it across that fraction line, it turns to a positive exponent, which is really, now if we look at this as a decimal, it's 0.5 plus 1, which is 1.5. All right, let's do this again with the -2. We're going to say 2 to the -2 power plus 1. I want to move this to the bottom of the fraction, which is going to give us 1 over 2 squared plus 1, which is 1 over 4 plus 1, which is 0.25 plus 1. So 1 plus 0.25, 1.25. Let's do it one more time. We'll do it with that -3. So we're going to say 2 to the -3 power plus 1. I want to turn that to a fraction, move that thing down. So we're going to get 1 over 2 to the +3 plus 1. Now you're saying 2 times 2 times 2, which would be 8. So this thing is really saying 1 over 8 plus 1, which if you turn that to a decimal, it's 0.125 plus 1. And add them up, you get 1.125. Now let's stop and just kind of let's see what's going on with our numbers here. These numbers, starting with the 2, 3, 5, 9, we can see that they're going larger. As we move down, as we start going in this direction, 2 to 1.5 to 1.25 to 1 1/8, these numbers are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If we added a -4, this number would get smaller than 1.125. If we added a +4, you get a number bigger than 9. So things are growing this way and they're getting smaller this way. Let's see if visually it helps us once we start putting this on the graph. So again, I'm going to start with 0, 2. I go over 0, I go up 2. I go over 1, go up 3, go over 2, up 5, and 3 and 9. So far, I'm going to have a graph that continues to move in that direction. Now, what about in the reverse? Well, if we plug in a -1, you're going to go up 1.5. So I'm going up to 1, but then I'm going to end up being in between 1 and 2 here. So I'll be about right there. My 2 goes up 1.25, which is going to be, here's 1, there's 2, there's a half. So we're looking at a little under that. And then we're even moving lower than that. As we get further in the negative direction here, this graph pushes down further and further and further. Now, if you take a look at the decimal, 0.5, 0.25, 0.125, we keep knocking this decimal down smaller and smaller and smaller. So what happens is we keep adding a small fraction to 1. This number is going to get closer and closer to 1. So if this thing kept going out, it's like we have this invisible wall at this positive 1 here that this graph is trying to get closer and closer to, but it's never going to touch. It's going to get closer and closer to it. And up here, this thing just keeps growing, faster and faster and faster. So we grow up, we grow kind of small, but we flatten out down here. That is graphing an exponential function.